In a desolate world reduced to ruins, survival is a daily struggle. Food is scarce, and the only way for children to eat is by trading valuable items. Among the crumbling streets, a mysterious golem roams, its origins unknown. This stone-like entity only appears in Sector 50, accepting trades in exchange for food. However, not everything is deemed valuable by the golem, leaving many children empty-handed and frustrated. A group of kids watches in disappointment as the golem refuses their flashlight, despite having accepted one just the day before. Though angered, they know better than to retaliate. Rumors whisper of golems unaliving people without warning. Then a white-haired boy named Ray steps forward, placing his entire collection of valuable items before the golem. Without hesitation, the massive entity grabs Ray's bag and empties it into its mouth. In return, it drops an abundance of food, far more than anyone else has ever received. The other children watch in stunned silence, jealousy burning in their eyes. How does Ray always manage to get such a large haul while the rest are left starving? Whispers spread among the crowd, some even considering stealing his supplies. But that thought is quickly dismissed. Ray isn't just any scavenger. He's known as the Ghost of 17th Street. As Ray makes his way to 17th Street, he senses something, a presence lurking in the shadows. His sharp instincts tell him exactly how many are hiding. 7. Without hesitation, he calls them out, inviting them to step into the open. A burly boy emerges, flanked by 6 others. This is Ron, a familiar face and a persistent nuisance. Despite Ray's previous warnings, Ron is back with another attempt to take what isn't his. Ron smirks, giving credit to Ray's sharp senses. They had been careful, yet still he was detected. He demands Ray's supplies, making it clear that if Ray doesn't comply, he won't be walking away unharmed. But Ray isn't fazed. If anyone is leaving in bad shape, it certainly won't be him. The Ghost of 17th Street has a reputation for a reason. Ron, emboldened by his numbers, throws a punch. But Ray barely reacts, just a slight tilt of his head, effortlessly dodging the attack. Using Ron's own momentum against him, Ray makes him stumble. Before he can hit the ground, Ray grips his shirt and drives a devastating punch into his gut. Ron collapses like a sack of bricks, his mouth wide open in shock. The rest of the gang hesitates, but backing down isn't an option now. They charge. The first swings a bat. Ray ducks and counters with an elbow strike, sending the attacker sprawling. One by one, he takes them down with minimal effort, each hit precise and decisive. Within moments, all 6 are writhing on the ground. Ray turns back to Ron. The once confident bully now trembles, fear evident in his eyes. Ray reminds him of the promise he made. If Ron ever showed his face again, he wouldn't be able to walk afterward. As he steps closer, Ron panics, pulling a dagger from behind his back, his hands slick with sweat. He calls Ray a monster, but deep down he knows the blade won't save him. That word, monster, has followed Ray for as long as he can remember. Even as a child, he was different. No matter how severe his injuries, his face remained expressionless. When other kids cried in despair, Ray stayed silent. His lack of emotions unsettled them, and eventually they stopped associating with him altogether. But Ray never wanted to be this way. More than anything, he wished to experience emotions like everyone else. Even now, after 6 years, he still feels nothing. However, he does have one unique ability: he can see emotions. Every person has a vessel inside them, filled with different shades of mana that reflect their feelings. Red for anger, hate, and love. Blue for apathy and ridicule. Yellow for joy and excitement. And countless other colors forming a spectrum only he can see. Looking at Ron, Ray sees deep black mana swirling within him, the color of pure, overwhelming fear. The closer Ray steps, the darker it becomes. Ron continues to issue threats, his voice shaking, but Ray sees through the facade. He questions whether Ron had planned to use the dagger from the beginning. Of course, Ron tries to lie, claiming he found it in the garbage. But Ray doesn't need words to detect a lie. He can see it in the colors of the vessel within Ron's chest. Despite his threats, Ron is too much of a coward to use the weapon. The moment of reckoning has come, and Ray is prepared to deliver the punishment he promised. Ron made a grave mistake challenging the Ghost of 17th Street. Now he will pay the price. After a long trek, Ray finally reaches his home. A small, makeshift tent where a group of children eagerly awaits his return. Among them is Pale, a green-eyed boy and the de facto leader of the underpass children. As soon as Ray steps inside, the kids swarm around him, their faces lighting up with relief and admiration. To them he is more than just a protector, he is their dependable older brother. Once they settle down, Pale instructs everyone to present the supplies they manage to gather. One by one the kids display their findings. A few pieces of bubble gum, some chocolate bars. Far from enough to feed all 7 of them. Anxiety begins to set in as they realize the scarcity of their rations. But then Ray unveils his haul. The sheer abundance of food leaves everyone in stunned silence before their excitement erupts. Some even begin to suspect that Ray must have stolen from the golem to amass such a supply. The truth, however, is different. Unlike the others, Ray understands the golem's true nature. It only accepts magical items infused with residual mana. The other children, unable to see mana, unknowingly offer worthless objects. But Ray's unique ability allows him to always make successful trades. With enough food to last the night, Pale steps forward to distribute it among the group. The youngest, Josephine, is served first, followed by the rest. As the others eat, Ray silently slips outside, lost in thought. No matter how much they struggle, it's never enough. There is always someone who goes to bed hungry. His mind drifts to the warehouse. A dangerous but resource-rich location that might hold the key to their survival. He contemplates making the trip no matter the cost. A memory surfaces. A flashback to a year ago. Buried in the snow and on the brink of freezing to death, Ray had already resigned himself to his fate. He was ready to fade into the cold. But then these very children found him, pulled him from the ice and saved him without expecting anything in return. They never asked for repayment. But Ray has his own principles, he always pays his debts whether in favor or vengeance. As he sits in deep reflection, Pale joins him, urging him to eat his share of the meal. Ray declines, claiming he isn't hungry, but his grumbling stomach betrays him. Without a word, Pale breaks his biscuit bar in half and hands a piece to Ray. Just then the sky darkens and rain begins to fall, but not ordinary rain. The droplets are black. It's a common occurrence in this ruined world, rumored to be the result of excessive magic usage by mages living in the lower-numbered sectors. Pale speculates that the golem itself was sent by a mage, but Ray isn't so sure. He believes it might be a machine. However, he chooses not to argue as he has seen the golems absorb mana firsthand. They draw energy from the atmosphere, condensing it within their cores before expelling it as a black gas. Ray is convinced that this gas is the source of the black rain. A sudden realization strikes him. Without hesitation he pulls up his hood and announces that he's heading out. Pale protests. The rain is too heavy and even rivers are beginning to overflow. But Ray has already made up his mind. With a final glance at his companion, he dashes off into the storm. There's a reason for his urgency. When it rains, people stay indoors, believing even a single drop of black rain can make them sick. But Ray knows how to shield himself, making this the perfect opportunity. His destination, 18th Street, home to Limpfoot Hector's ration warehouse. As he arrives, he spots a group of thugs inside, gambling and drinking completely at ease. It's exactly as he predicted. On rainy days, the guards are too preoccupied to keep watch. Slipping into the warehouse's dark interior, Ray begins his search. The space is pitch black, but he has a solution. The air is thick with mana, its colors swirling in an unseen spectrum. Carefully, Ray draws in specific hues, combining them into the right formula, and ignites a flame in his palm. Though he lacks formal knowledge of magic, his innate ability allows him to wield it instinctively. Still, controlling red mana remains difficult for him. As the firelight flickers, he sifts through the supply boxes. Suddenly, a dagger whizzes past, grazing his ear. He's been spotted. Emerging from behind a pillar, 3 thugs stand ready, their eyes glowing through night vision goggles. They had been expecting him. Another dagger flies toward him, but Ray is already moving, dodging effortlessly. The thugs gape in disbelief. How is he able to evade their attacks in complete darkness? What they don't realize is that Ray isn't relying on sight. He can see the color of their mana vessels. Right now they are filled with a deep red, pulsing with rage. Anticipating their movements, Ray evades another strike before retaliating with a sharp kick to one of their necks. The second is taken down with a well-aimed punch. The final thug, now alone, hesitates before meeting the same fate, doubled over in pain as Ray delivers a brutal blow to his gut. Before Ray can take another step, a new presence enters the warehouse. A man steps forward, exuding an aura of danger. Unlike the others, Ray immediately recognizes him. Humphrey, an executive of the Hector Group. Humphrey, the bald enforcer of the Hector Group, scowls in disappointment as he finds his men sprawled on the ground, defeated by none other than Ray. The fact that a mere scavenger managed to take them down irritates him to no end. Ray, however, knows better than to take this man lightly. Without hesitation, he pulls his hoodie over his face, ready to make a swift escape. Ray moves in for a quick strike, aiming at Humphrey's chest to push him away from the exit. But the attack barely phases the brute. In retaliation, Humphrey lunges, attempting to grab Ray's head. At the last moment, Ray ducks, narrowly avoiding the grip, only to be sent skidding across the floor by a powerful punch. He quickly realizes this man isn't just strong, he's a monster. Humphrey follows up with a flurry of punches, but Ray dodges with swift, precise movements. Despite his agility, he knows he can't keep this up forever. He needs a plan. Observing his opponent's stance, he notices an opening. Without wasting a second, he strikes Humphrey's chest, intensifying the fire in his palm upon contact. The moment of distraction is enough. Ray vanishes into the shadows. The remaining guards scatter through the warehouse, searching frantically. They assume that, after taking on Humphrey, Ray must be too exhausted to get far. And truthfully, they're not wrong. Ray is running low on energy, and if caught, he's done for. Spotting a loose stone nearby, he hurls it in the opposite direction. The guards, easily fooled, rush after the noise, giving Ray the chance to slip away. Successfully looting the infamous Hector Group's warehouse, Ray knows he's far from safe. If they catch him, he's as good as dead. Not that he fears death itself. What terrifies him is leaving the underpass children to fend for themselves in this ruthless world. Just as he believes he's in the clear, more pursuers close in. Ray picks up speed, but the chase leads him to a dead end. Trapped, the thugs smirk, brandishing their weapons. They demand that he surrender what he stole or they'll carve him up. Glancing around, Ray sees no sign of Humphrey. If it's just these guys, he can take them. Mana crackles around his fists as he prepares for battle. One thug charges. Ray sidesteps and delivers a brutal uppercut, knocking him out cold. Another rushes in, but Ray swiftly grabs his dagger-wielding hand and channels electricity through it. The shock sends the attacker crashing to the ground, unconscious. More footsteps echo through the rain. Reinforcements are closing in, and Ray isn't sure how much longer he can keep using magic. His stamina is running low. That's when he spots an old garbage bin behind him. Without hesitation, he dives inside, pulling the lid shut. The thugs search the area, cursing in frustration when they find nothing. Determined, they push forward, convinced Ray couldn't have gone far. But with the rain pouring heavily, their footsteps fade into the distance. Ray knows they won't find him now. He decides to stay hidden for the night. Leading them back to the bridge would put the kids in danger. The next morning, sunlight filters through the cracks of the bin, waking Ray from his restless sleep. Cautiously, he climbs out, stretching his stiff limbs, only to lock eyes with an enraged thug standing just outside. Ray doesn't need to read his vessel to know the man is furious. And in Ray's weakened state, he isn't sure he can take him on alone. The thug lunges, dagger glinting in the light, aiming to end Ray right then and there. Instinctively, Ray draws his own blade, slashing at his attacker. But the thug dodges, retaliating with a swift counterattack. Ray attempts to evade, but his footing betrays him. He stumbles, crashing onto the ground. The thug grins, raising his weapon for the final strike. The blade descends, aiming straight for Ray's eye socket. Bang! A gunshot rings through the air. The thug's body stiffens before crumpling lifelessly to the ground. Ray blinks, heart pounding. He turns toward the source of the shot and sees a figure stepping forward. A man with sharp black hair and a smirk that carries both amusement and danger. This is Niles, the boss of 17th Street. Niles couldn't help but warn Ray about how dangerously close he had been to death. If that gunshot had been even a second late, Ray would have been pushing up daisies. In response, Ray questioned why Niles was even here. After all, the man was never awake this early. Niles admitted that he had heard rumors of Hector's men prowling the area. Then his sharp eyes caught the canned food Ray was hiding under his hoodie, instantly realizing that Ray must have stolen it from Hector's warehouse. Calling out Ray for his bold move, Niles didn't sound impressed. Ray responded with a thanks, but Niles quickly clarified that it wasn't a compliment. Internally, Ray found himself uncertain about how to deal with Niles. People like him had emotions so monotonous that their vessels never seemed to fill up, making it impossible to gauge what he was thinking. Niles issued another warning. If Ray kept pulling stunts like this, he was going to get himself killed. There were people he shouldn't be messing with and he should know better. But for Ray, risking his life was still preferable to starving to death. Niles had no argument against that, so instead he simply reminded Ray that they were even now. Ray had saved him once and now Niles had returned the favor. However, Ray insisted he had never intended to save Niles. He had merely mistaken him for supplies when he pulled him from the river. Even so, Niles couldn't deny the fact that he had survived because of this kid. To understand their history, we flash back a year. Ray had found Niles floating down the river and had pulled him out. At least that's what he claimed. Ray had no reason to doubt him, especially since Niles had repaid his debt by teaching him valuable lessons. Bringing the conversation back to the present, Ray asked an important question. Could he join an organization? More specifically, Niles's organization. Niles didn't give an immediate response. Instead, he stepped behind a nearby wall and posed an unexpected question. Could Ray use magic? Ray was stunned. How did Niles know that? But Niles didn't answer, though internally he was pleased that his hunch had been right. And that had confirmed his suspicions. Ray pressed him further, demanding to know how he had figured it out. Finally, Niles explained that a fellow magician had once told him about mana, the energy in the air used for magic. Ray asked if that magician had ever mentioned colors. Niles didn't recall anything about that, but he did remember that mana was supposed to be invisible to the naked eye. This revelation fascinated Ray as he could clearly see different colors in the air. He pressed for more details, but Niles, growing frustrated, insisted he had already told Ray everything he knew. Returning to the main topic, Ray once again asked about joining the organization. Niles bluntly rejected him. When Ray demanded to know why, Niles remained silent. The real reason, however, lay in the geography of the slums. The sectors were lined along the Elton River, and if Ray simply followed it upstream, he could escape to a better life. Niles believed it would be a waste for someone with Ray's abilities to die here. Of course, he didn't say any of this out loud. Instead, he simply asked Ray if he had ever considered leaving the 50th sector. He even offered to help him find a car to get out. Ray refused. He had kids to take care of. Niles, however, assured him that he planned to open an orphanage, promising the children a better life. Ray couldn't tell if Niles was bluffing or being serious. His vessel's color never changed, making him impossible to read. But Niles had always kept his word before. Shifting the conversation, Ray warned Niles about Hector's group, stating they were preparing for war. He had seen them receiving truckloads of weapons. Niles, however, already knew. In fact, by killing one of Hector's men, he had essentially declared war himself. Ray reminded him that if he lost, the people in the slums would suffer. Just then, Niles's driver called out, signaling it was time to leave. As Niles got into the car, he warned Ray that the sector was about to become a war zone and that he should find another hideout. Before leaving, he tossed Ray a small potion bottle, instructing him to use it to heal his injured ear. Then he was gone. Back at 17th Street near Central Square, one of the underpass kids, Josephine, spotted Ray and ran to him. Her initial excitement quickly turned to worry when she saw he was injured. Ray reassured her, claiming he had simply fallen, and the little girl wiped her tears, relieved that he hadn't been fighting. Watching the whirlwind of emotions flicker through her, Ray marveled at how people could feel so many things at once. Handing Josephine the canned food, he told her to take it back to the tent and inform Pale that he would return soon. Before leaving, he approached an old blind woman, Viola, who was a storyteller. He asked if she had been telling Josephine anything. She replied that she had been talking about rainbows. Ray gently advised her not to fill the children's heads with fantastical stories, fearing it might make them less content with their reality. But Viola disagreed. Children needed to imagine a world beyond the slums. Ray took note of her vessel. It was purple. He had never seen that color in anyone else before and wasn't sure what it represented. Shaking the thought away, he warned her about the upcoming conflict and suggested she move before things escalated. As he walked away, Viola reflected on how considerate Ray was for a child. The next morning, Ray ran errands as a delivery boy. When he arrived at a shop, the owner was surprised. It was supposed to be Ron's shift. Ray, of course, knew the real reason Ron was absent. The poor guy had both his legs broken and was now helpless. Ray casually asked if the shopkeeper planned to evacuate since a war was brewing, but the man was confident that wouldn't happen. Ray, intrigued, asked why. The shopkeeper revealed that Hector's group and Niles were currently negotiating. If things were settled peacefully, there would be no war. Just then, the door to the negotiation room opened and Hector and his men stepped out. Hector, a scarred and imposing figure, immediately took notice of the young delivery boy. Amused by the sight of a child still working while adults fled, he placed a hand on Ray's neck, a twisted gesture of appreciation, and gave him a few coins, telling him to take care of himself. As Hector's group left, Humphrey, the bald brute from before, suddenly noticed Ray's injured ear. Ray instinctively hid it, knowing he had been recognized. The tension in the air grew thick, but before Humphrey could act, Hector called him away, ordering him to stop lingering. As the gangsters drove off, Ray was left with one thought. Humphrey had definitely recognized him. But why had he said nothing? Wasting no time, Ray and the shopkeeper hurried to Niles to ask about the negotiations. Unfortunately, Niles had only one thing to say: the talks had failed. War was now inevitable. The shop owner is dismayed to hear the grim news. Niles elaborates, explaining that Hector's demands were entirely unreasonable. He wanted complete control over Niles' organization, which was a far worse fate than engaging in a full-scale conflict. Apologizing to both the shop owner and Ray, Niles advises them to remain cautious and stay in hiding. As Ray leaves the shop, he walks alone through the streets, reflecting on the difficulties of navigating the area if war breaks out. Determined to prepare for the worst, he decides to gather as much food as possible. Suddenly, he notices Humphrey sitting inside a car, an unusual sight in Sector 50. The vehicle's presence raises suspicion, prompting Ray to investigate later. Meanwhile, at the entrance of Hector's group on 18th Street, a powerful new figure emerges from the mysterious car. Hector, usually a dominant force, assumes a more submissive stance in the presence of this unknown man. His commanding aura is undeniable and his identity remains a mystery. The monocle over his left eye only adds to his imposing presence. Even Ray, observing from a distance, doesn't recognize him. Ray carefully analyzes the man's vessel and notices its dark blue hue, almost black, resembling the mana of moving golems. He also spots peculiar rings around the vessel, each surrounded by an unusual concentration of mana. It appears the man is using these rings to contain the energy, an ability Ray has never encountered before. The realization strikes. This man is incredibly dangerous. Ray knows he must warn Niles immediately. The scene transitions to 17th Street, where Niles' men are preparing for the impending battle. Ray arrives, startling a guard by seemingly appearing out of nowhere. When questioned about how he entered, Ray simply states that the gate was open. He then asks for Niles' whereabouts, only to learn that he has gone out to prepare for the war. The guard advises Ray to leave as well, as the situation is growing increasingly dangerous. Since Niles is absent, Ray entrusts the guard with a crucial message. Niles must be wary of the man with the monocle. However, Ray struggles to articulate the significance of a magic user being in Hector's ranks, so he keeps the explanation brief. Later, Ray returns to the tent where the children reside. Sitting outside, he is joined by Pale, who questions him about the conflict and who he believes will emerge victorious. Ray remains uncertain. Both sides seem evenly matched. However, he secretly hopes for Niles' victory, as it is the only way to guarantee the children's safety. If Hector wins, the street children will undoubtedly be sold into slavery. Their conversation is abruptly interrupted by a terrifying noise. Ray immediately tenses, sensing impending danger. The scene quickly shifts back to 17th Street, where Niles' soldiers are engaged in a desperate battle against monstrous golems. Despite their best efforts, bullets prove useless against these magical constructs. In response, the creatures unleash a devastating surge of dark blue energy, annihilating everything in their path. As if that weren't enough, the golems dispatch Niles' men effortlessly, treating them like mere playthings. The orchestrator of this carnage is none other than the monocled man, who watches with satisfaction as his creations wreak havoc. Pleased with their performance, he orders them to continue the slaughter, leaving nothing behind. Back under the bridge where the children reside, Ray prepares to rush into battle. However, Pale grabs his hand, stopping him. They argue over who should go, waking Josephine in the process. Pale quickly reassures the little girl that they will return soon and urges her to go back to sleep. Eventually, Pale concedes, agreeing to stay behind with the children while Ray goes to investigate. Before letting him go, he warns Ray not to venture too far and to return as soon as he assesses the situation. Ray makes his way to the battlefield, only to be met with pure devastation. Flames engulf the streets and the bodies of soldiers lay scattered, many missing limbs. Amidst the destruction, a familiar red-haired soldier struggles to stay alive. With his last breath, he warns Ray that Hector's men had brought golems and that the monocled man was controlling them. Before he can say more, his life is brutally extinguished. Grief-stricken, Ray kneels beside the fallen soldier, closing his lifeless eyes. Picking up a dagger from the ground, he steels himself for what lies ahead. With Niles on the losing end of this battle, Ray knows he must act. As Ray moves forward, the scene shifts back to the bridge where the children reside. The horrors of war have reached even them. The once lively shelter is now a massacre. Brutally slaughtered bodies litter the area. Only Pale remains, holding Josephine tightly in his arms, tears streaming down his face. A towering golem stands before them, an emotionless executioner. In its palm, dark blue energy coalesces, ready to be unleashed. Pale, knowing his fate is sealed, sheds his last tears, praying that Ray does not return to witness this nightmare. This will continue in the next video. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel so you can be notified when I release the next video. Thank you, my dear viewer, for watching. Till next time.